We are in a very strange time in our culture's history. There's a lot of hurt, visceral pain on the surface of our culture right now. There's a lot of conflict on the surface of our culture right now. And there's a lot of fear. Again, visceral, tangible fear that we're experiencing in our culture right now. The root of all that is really two major cultural flashpoints that coincided in the last 3 months to take us to a place that back in January, I don't think anybody would have predicted that we would have been. It started with the coronavirus and all the fears that came with that, and then the lockdowns and all the fears and the calamity that resulted from that and the economic impact. And then we had a video that gave us all a peek of some of the horrifying natures of human existence. And then the protests that came out of that. And then we got to a place of civil unrest, which I think is where we are right now as I shoot this video on Friday afternoon, June 5th. A place of civil unrest. And I think all of these things work together to create the tangible feelings that we have right now. But I felt this morning compelled to dive in a little bit, to take our series, to continue our series of face-to-face encounters with Jesus, but to take a little closer examination of this moment that we're in culturally. I want to start with the idea that the unrest and the fear, the feelings, the emotions that go with this moment we're in right now are not new. The fear and the conflict and the tension that we are experiencing in this culture is not new. What is new is the fact that we're talking about it more than we used to. And that's a good thing. We should be talking more about these things than we ever have in the past. But I think for some of us, the fact that we're talking about it more openly now creates a higher sense of dread and a higher sense of unease at where that conversation is leading. The fact that we're talking about it more is good. But the problem with that conversation is that it's largely being had on social media. And that is not good. I'm going to talk for just a second about why these conversations taking place on social media is a dangerous thing. But before I do, I want to remind you, for those of you who know me, and for those of you who've been in classes with me before, this is old news. For those of you who may not know my background, social media has been a professional research interest of mine for years. I wrote my dissertation on social media and its impact on relationships. I have been fascinated by the impact that social media has on our culture for a very long time. And I say that because my opinions on it are not just rooted in what I see on Facebook. My opinions on it are rooted in a lot of data and a lot of research and a lot of conversations with people over the years as to how social media impacts them. Okay, so having said that, let's talk for a minute about why these conversations are great to have, but them playing out on social media is not. Whether we are talking about a conversation related to a health issue, a pandemic, or we're talking about issues related to race and race relations, these are nuanced conversations. They involve introspection, they involve an analysis of the world around you, and they involve the ability to challenge what you hear and what you believe for the purposes of growth. That is a complicated, complex process. Social media does not allow for that process. Social media, because of its very brief nature, because it is a series of asynchronous communication, which asynchronous communication means I say something and then I wait as the other person reads it and then crafts a message in response. Synchronous communication is what you do when you're talking face to face to another human being. Because of the asynchronous nature of social media, there's no room for that kind of nuance. Even in the long threads, there's just not room for the type of nuance that is required to truly and sincerely unpack these issues and unpack these fears in a healthy way that leads to growth. Social media, because of its asynchronous nature and because of its brief nature, tends to pit two extreme opposing viewpoints against each other and then demand that everyone take a side. That is problematic because most of these conversations simply don't work that way. But the idea that we pit two extreme opposing viewpoints against each other and then demand that people take a side is very real in the digital world. But new to this particular moment in history, new to 2020, is that now you're being told that if you don't choose a side and if you don't scream at all of the people who oppose you, then you're part of the problem. That's fairly new. That observation is one that I've had a lot lately. I've noticed that there's a lot of different places telling us that if you're not picking a side and then loudly articulating the perspective of that side, that the problem is you because you're not being bold enough. The first thing I need you to hear this morning is that is a construct of social media. That mindset is a construct of social media, and it's not how the world actually works. The idea that we have to pick an extreme position and then relentlessly and out loud argue the viewpoints from that extreme position is just not the way that human dialogue and conversation was meant to go. I'm going to give you an example of how social media has created a situation where we can't really have this type of dialogue. Let's talk about the coronavirus for just a second, because that one's a little less flashpointy now than it was 2 weeks ago. It is possible, it is entirely possible for you to believe that it's a very real threat and it's something that we should take very seriously, while also believing that the economic impact and the government overreach that we saw in certain places during the lockdowns was very concerning. It's okay to believe all of that simultaneously, but if you scroll through your social media feed, that wasn't usually the case. For most of the popular social media places, it's not about nuance and it's not about believing things that fit in a lot of boxes. It's about picking one and screaming it. The idea that you can believe all of those things that I just said, it's a very real disease that we need to take precautions about, but also that we have concerns about the unemployment and about the economic impact, and then question out loud, was it necessary? Did we need to take the steps that we took? It's okay to ask that question. And it is okay to ask that question while still believing that there was a problem that we needed to address. These ideas are not mutually exclusive. And that is an important thing for you to understand, because I don't think your phone is telling you that. To tread into more dangerous waters, it's also possible to believe that a video of a police officer taking the life of George Floyd was horrifying, and that officer should be held accountable for his actions, while also believing that riots and looting and vandalism are horrifying too. That's okay. It's okay to hold that belief. It is okay to be aghast at George Floyd's death and to want change to come from it, while also being aghast at Daniel Dorn's death and wanting change to come from that as well. And if you're not as familiar with that name, that is the name of a retired police officer who was attempting to protect a store from looting and was killed in the process. It is okay to be horrified by both of those deaths and to feel that we need to make societal change as a result of both of those deaths, and that as a culture, we can honor both of those deaths. That's okay for you to believe. The problem is, on most social media feeds, that's not the message we're relaying to people. Social media convinces people that everything is hot and cold. Everything is black and white. Everything is right and wrong. Everything is good and evil. My side is the good side. Your side is the evil side. And let's duke it out until one of us finally conquers the other one. And for the record, the way we define conquering the other one now is whoever has the best mic drop post that gets the most likes and the most shares. That's how we decide who wins debate these days. Folks, that's not the way the real world works. Very few things in this life are all one thing. The world itself is complicated and it's nuanced. Conversation is great. It is essential and it's vital, and social media isn't designed for conversation. Nuance doesn't make a good meme. Dialogue needs to flow and it needs to be safe. Social media isn't. To actually grow in a conversation, I need to be honest out loud. I can't be honest out loud unless I feel that I won't be judged. And social media doesn't work that way. because people tend to pull a sentence or a word out of a post and then attack it. Honest questions and honest observations are met with thumb warriors who find a sense of purpose in battling people online. All nuance is lost. All hope for growth is gone, because when people feel attacked, they then get defensive. People who engage in this kind of online warfare, they do it for a number of reasons. For some, they're just trolls. They love stirring the pot and getting people worked up, and they like to watch the chaos that unfolds because of it. For others, they do this because their lives are lacking a sense of personal fulfillment, and being right online makes them feel powerful. So those groups do exist. But for most people, they're doing it. They're arguing these viewpoints online, and they're posting the things that they're posting, not because they're trolls and not because of a deep sense of internal hurt. They're posting these things because they truly believe that they are fighting the noble end of whatever war they've chosen to participate in. They're saying what they're saying because they truly believe it. They truly believe it to be virtuous, and they believe it to be worth saying. If you are listening to my voice this morning and you've found yourself engaged in some of these online conversations, my guess is that's probably you. I probably just described you. You're saying what you're saying because you truly believe it, and because you believe it to be virtuous, and because you believe it to be worth saying. The good news is that there is a face-to-face encounter with Jesus where all of that was true as well. And that's where I want to spend our last few minutes this morning. In Luke chapter 22, we get a picture of a true and noble fight. And we see how Jesus responded when that fight escalated. Jesus is going to be arrested and crucified soon. Before that happens, he goes to the garden to pray. He brings his disciples with him. And so in this moment, we've got Jesus and the disciples in the garden. And Judas, who has betrayed Jesus to the Roman authorities, shows up with a contingent of soldiers who are there to arrest Jesus. And so there we have it. A face-to-face encounter that I imagine was as tense as any situation that you could imagine taking place. You have Jesus and the disciples, you have Judas and the soldiers, and they're staring at each other face-to-face, and everyone knowing full well why they're there. Peter, who has a history of being fairly impulsive, which I don't mean to sound demeaning, he has a tendency to have his actions dictated by his current emotion. He responds often out of emotion. And in this moment, he picks up a sword and he swings it. And that sword cuts off the ear of a soldier who was there to arrest Jesus. Now, if we're going to connect this biblical moment to our current culture, then I need you to hear this. There has never been a more noble or righteous or justifiable moment for the use of violence than we find in this passage. Peter was not defending an idea. He wasn't defending an ideology or emotions. He was defending the literal human Jesus who was standing in his presence, who had chosen him, who he had bonded with. He was physically defending Jesus from soldiers who he knew were there to take him. Force and violence in this moment, maybe more than any other moment in history, are completely understandable. So what does Jesus do? He tells Peter something that I think we all need to hear in this moment that we're in right now. He steps in and he says, "No more of this." I imagine he stood between Peter and the soldiers, and I imagine his arms went up. And he said, "No more of this." He then picks up the ear of the man whose ear has been chopped off, the man who was there to arrest him, the man who was there to take Jesus away, and he heals him. No more of this. Most of us in this current culture aren't swinging literal swords at each other. Most of us aren't cutting off ears, but we're still attacking each other out of righteous indignation. No more of this. Whether your sword is a brick, a badge, or a keyboard, no more of this. Aggression and judgment are not the way to make progress. John's account of this moment in Jesus' life has a very weird detail. In John's account, we hear that the name of the soldier whose ear had been chopped off was Malchus. Why include that? Why is that there? It changes the story not at all. It has no impact on the actual events of what takes place. So why is it there? I think it does change the story in one small way. It reminds us that on the other end of Peter's righteous outburst was a human being. He didn't strike a soldier. He struck Malchus. Maybe Malchus had a family. He had a history. He worked to get where he was. He had a life story. He wasn't a faceless, emotionless idea, and neither are the people we're attacking online. We're not attacking ideologies. We're attacking human beings. Maybe that's why we're given the name of the soldier whose ear was struck. These are human beings we're talking about. No more of this. I'm not naive. I know there's a lot of hurt in this world. I know there's evil in this world. I know that we have a long way to go as a society. I know that we're flawed. I know that we're ugly. But no more of this. I know that the hurt that people experience right now is justifiable. Peter's hurt was justifiable. His anger, his righteous indignation was just that. It was righteous. And Jesus still responded, no more of this. That's my prayer for us this morning. I know we're flawed, but no more of this. Talk to people in the real world. Don't post back and forth in a meme war that no one can really win. No more of this. Take your anger, your aggression, and your hostility, no matter how justified and truly and sincerely rooted it is, and hear Jesus' words when it comes to aggression and violence. No more of this. Folks, make a difference. In the real world, make a difference where you can. Not just by judging everyone who doesn't view the world the same way you do. No more of this. If you have strong political beliefs, strong feelings about what's happening in our culture right now, you probably think I'm talking to the other side. When I say no more of this, you probably want to apply it to all the people you disagree with. I don't care what side of these arguments you find yourself on. I don't care what end of the spectrum, or more than likely, what midpoint in the spectrum you land. No more of this. Letting social media dictate the way we talk to each other, the way we think, the way we communicate, the way we engage in debate needs to stop. It doesn't represent true thought and true nuance. No more of this. Passing judgment on the totality of other human beings because they disagree with you on a singular point has to stop. No more of this. Not wanting to acknowledge that there are people in this country who've had a very different experience than you. Not wanting to acknowledge that there are people in this country who have been mistreated generationally because you're afraid of what that political statement says needs to stop. No more of this. Allowing ourselves as a culture to be driven and motivated by fear relentlessly needs to stop. No more of this. Aggressively attacking people who we perceive as a threat is what has to stop. That's what Peter did in this story, and Jesus' response to Peter was no more of this. Jesus doesn't attack Peter's belief system. He doesn't tell him his ideology is all wrong. He doesn't tell him that the reason he's angry is wrong. But in the face of violence, and in the face of violence inflicted on another human being whose name we're given, Jesus' response is no more of this. My prayer for our culture this morning, my prayer for our society this morning, let's not just change the culture. Let's change the way we communicate about it. No more of this.